Well, thank you, Cindy, and good morning, everyone, and welcome. And we're so glad that you are joining us today on Cinco de Mayo and National Travel Advisor Day. I have to admit that a few years ago, I didn't know there was such a thing as National Travel Advisor Day, but it's true, it's today. It is the first Wednesday of May. So we're so glad you're joining us for the spring edition of Travel One's Education Forum. And we host these forums twice a year because we really see it as one of our roles as your travel management partner to help you sort through all the travel related information that is out there. And there's a lot of travel information out there, right? So we want to help you to simplify it and to understand the trends so that you can make informed decisions and you can make confident decisions regarding topics like cost savings and traveler health and safety and all the other factors that affect your travel program. So here we are. We're 14 months, give or take, into the pandemic, and we know that there have been some companies and some organizations that really have been traveling through the pandemic. Not many. There have been a few, but that have been traveling all the way through. There have been a few companies and organizations that just recently restarted their travel programs, and of course there have been some that are just now announcing future dates for the restart of their travel program. A lot of it has to do with the culture within your organization, with your comfort level, with your industry, with all these different factors. But our goal for today is that when you're ready to travel, when the time is right for you and your organization, we want you to be aware of what the path back to safe travel looks like and feels like for you and your travelers. So that's really going to be our first topic. And then when we get done with that, we're going to switch gears and talk about some rental car topics and answer the question, why has rental car availability and rental car rates become a hot topic in the travel industry? And then when we finish with that, we'll look ahead and have a little bit of an outlook as to what the cost of travel will be for the next 6 to 12 to 18 months or so. And of course, save time at the end for Q&A. So really that is our agenda for the next 55 minutes or so. So before I dive into the program, I do want to take a few minutes and just reassure everyone on the call, which by the way are our Travel One customers and a few prospective customers and some key supplier partners and friends of Travel One. So just kind of reassure everyone on the call that Travel One is in fact going to make it through this crisis. As your travel management partner, we want you to know that we're going to be here on the other side of this. And as I like to say, not just going to be here on the other side of this, but in many ways, we're going to make it through this with relative strength. So it probably goes without saying that the last 14 months have been very difficult for the travel industry, and Travel One is no exception. Early in the pandemic, we made the decision that we're going to have to reduce our team. And that was a bad day at Travel One. I mean, any way you cut it, that was a difficult time. But with the perspective of time, it's become clear that that was the right decision. And since then, our strategy has been to keep our team together. And when I say our team, I mean as many of our frontline advisors as possible. We've been keeping our team together at reduced hours. So that means as travel recovers, like it is now, Travel One doesn't have to go out and search and hire and train new employees because frankly, our employees are here working at part-time. So our plan for recovery is simply to bring our employees back from part-time to full-time, which is exactly what we're in the process of doing right now. And I have to say, I really like that strategy because number one, it maintains the long-standing relationship we've had with our employees. It maintains the long-standing relationship many of our advisors have had with you, our customers, and it fits perfectly with the high touch and white glove level of service that Travel One is known for. So, so really fast forward to today, and I'll give you a real high level overview of how Travel One is doing. So first of all, with regard to our leisure department, I am a bit overwhelmed with the interest in leisure travel. To say there's pent-up demand in leisure travel is an accurate and perhaps a bit of an understatement. So leisure travel demand is popping at the seams. I am pleasantly surprised with the level of activity in the meeting and incentive side of Travel One, and also, frankly, in the Camp Kids summer program that we run at Travel One. But when you think about the meeting, I mean, if you just slow down and think about it, and you think about that many employees have been working remotely for the last 12 to 14 months, and now companies, employers are trying to re-engage with their employees, it makes sense that meeting travel is starting to pick up. And then with regard to corporate travel, I kind of hinted earlier that you know, the recovery of corporate travel is spotty, but it is certainly growing. It is kind of a slow and steady growth of corporate travel. So as a whole, if you look at Travel One as a whole, we're approaching 40% recovered from our pre-COVID transaction numbers. So that's where we are as of today. And on a related note, kind of a different but related note, there have been a few, what I would say, unique growth opportunities that Travel One has been able to take advantage of over the last year, that when travel returns, when the industry returns, will make Travel One even stronger. So last month, Travel One turned 51 years strong. We celebrated our 51st anniversary in April. And as I like to say internally, we're not only mapping out the recovery from COVID, but we're also mapping out our plan really for the next 50 years of Travel One. So, okay, so moving on to our program for today, I'd like to turn our attention now to the path back to safe travel. And as a way of introducing our speaker, I'm going to talk a little bit about Travel One's relationship with BCD Travel. And as you may know, Travel One has been a long-standing affiliate with BCD Travel itself. BCD, the second largest, you know, now they're the second largest travel management company in the industry, so certainly a significant player. And we've been a long-standing affiliate. And in fact, we hold a board-level position on the BCD affiliate program board. So by affiliate, that means there's no ownership connection between Travel One and BCD Travel. I kind of like to think of it or explain of it almost like a code share relationship. You know how there are airline code share relationships? Think of Travel One and BCD as like code share partners, where Travel One has access to BCD's global network and access to their hotel and vendor discount programs and access to their technology. And last but not least, access to wonderful resources like Mike Eggleton from BCD's research and intelligence team. So Mike has been a member of the BCD research and intelligence team since 2013. And prior to that, he had a 24-year career at BA, British Airways. He's responsible for producing their annual industry forecast, which we send out to many of our customers. And he's responsible for, as it says on his bio, providing insights on a range of trends and issues relating to business travel. And when I read that, I thought, like the path back to safe travel. So joining us from the UK, I am very pleased to introduce Mike Eggleton.
Thanks,
Mike?
Bill.
Yeah, and I was going to say you might be on mute, but you got it.
I'm off now. You can see me, you can hear me. Thanks, Bill. And good morning, everyone. It's really nice to join you from the UK, albeit in a virtual state. But I'll crack on with the slides, as I know I've got a lot to get through. And I've been presenting a lot on the path to safe travel recently. And I always try to start with a reflection on the state of the pandemic, because I think it's useful to just remember and reflect on where we are right now. So on the next slide, what you'll see is the number of new daily cases of COVID-19 around the world by region. And 1 year on, who thought we'd be where we are today? I personally didn't, and it's gone on a lot longer than most of us expected. And looking at the chart, you can see that Europe and North America had sort of dominated COVID infections during the latter half of 2020, and Asia have been regarded as doing quite a good job of containing the situation. But then moved forward into the start of 2021, and it became a European story. We had new variants taking hold here and pushing a number of countries into new waves of infections. But then move forward even further and to the current day, and it's now Asia that's taken centre stage once again. And since the beginning of this year, Asia's share of new COVID-19 cases has soared from 13% to more than 50%, and it's not over. And other regions have seen an elevation in case numbers, but as you can see, they do appear to be bringing the situation under some control. But this is largely a reflection of new variants taking hold, and in some countries a slow pace of their vaccination programs. And I think it's interesting on the next slide to look at how the pandemic has actually moved around the world, moving from 1 through to 8. It started off as an Asian issue. I mean, to be honest, most of us just thought it was a repeat of SARS and it would remain quite local. But very quickly, it had found its way into Europe. And then by stage 3, as early as April last year, it had gone across the Atlantic into North America. And then by the middle of the year, at stage 4, it was a truly global pandemic. By sort of August, September time, Asia was experiencing a second wave, so it had actually gone back to where it started. Once again, it moved over to Europe, then across the Atlantic, and now we're back where it all started again, back in Asia. And of course, the big question I think we all need to ask is where next? Of course, the big difference is we now have vaccines, so things need not follow the same path. On the next slide, what we'll show you is that because infections have remained at such a high level, that's meant that lockdowns and restrictions have remained. And this map, it's courtesy of the University of Oxford, and what they've produced is something called the Stringency Index, which shows how severe restrictions are. The darker the colour, the stricter the restrictions. And restrictions are pretty strict in Europe, and they have been in the Americas, but now they're becoming stricter once again across Asia. Recently, we've seen Delhi go back into lockdown. Tokyo is now in its 3rd state of emergency. And only today I was reading about a new spike of infections in both Singapore and Hong Kong. And reopening, it's all going to be about COVID-19 metrics, but it's not just about case numbers. Looking at the traffic light system we're going to have in the UK for restarting international travel, governments are also interested in other measures like the rate of vaccination in the destination country, whether new variants are present in the destination country, and how good that country is at analysing infections so that they can look at the genomic code of positive test results to see if new variants are taking hold in those countries. So that all means that when international travel reopens, it's unlikely to be uniform, even within the same region. Now, the pandemic had an impact on air travel, and in the next slide, what we look at is global demand as measured by IATA. The blue bars are what you need to look at, and that's actual traffic, airline traffic, and by April 2020, global demand had slumped by 94% year over year. Now, since then, the recovery, as you can see, has been pretty slow, and it's been driven largely by the domestic segment. That's the blue line, and that's mainly due to a recovery in China. But more recently, it's been weighed down by problems in Brazil and India, which are both experiencing their own new waves of infections. Now, looking at the latest data, and that was for February 2021, demand globally was still down 75%. International travel was down by almost 90% year over year. Domestic was down by about a half. Now, as we move forward into March and April, we should see some improvement, but that's largely because we're cycling over weak data a year ago. And we've also seen a big impact on business travel frequency, which we'll see in the next chart. And this is based on a survey of our own travellers at BCD Travel. And we asked them how frequently they were travelling pre-pandemic, so in 2019, and how frequently they travelled during 2020. And the first thing I draw your attention to is the proportion of travellers who weren't really travelling a lot. They were making 2 trips or less per year. And in 2019, that accounted for 18% of travellers. But in 2020, that had soared to 67%. Looking at the flip side, the frequent travellers, those making 7 trips or more a year, they previously added up to 36%. But by 2020, their share had shrunk to just 7%. Clearly no surprise, but I think it's useful putting it into numbers. So then we look at the path to safe travel, how are things going to get going again on the next slide. And we surveyed our travellers in the first week of December 2020, and we shared the results in a BCD Travel webinar in January, and we surveyed them again in the middle of February 2021 to see how things had changed. And we ended up with 844 responses. And 2/3 of those responses were from travellers based in North America. So the results are heavily skewed to what's going on in North America. So what did they tell us about their return to travel? Well, the first thing we did was ask them about when they expected to resume regular travel again. The light bars are the results from the December 2020 survey. The latest survey results are in the dark green bars. No surprise that the time has shifted to the right. This is understandable. If you think since we first surveyed travellers, we've had new variants coming in around most of the world, and that's pushed up cases. And that in turn has resulted in lockdowns being extended or restrictions being tightened in response. So some people are simply finding it difficult to travel anyway. But there is good news, and there's real cause for optimism. When we first surveyed travellers, 93% said they'd be travelling by the end of 2021. In our second survey, that figure has only fallen to 83%. So I think that's good news, something to be encouraged about. And I believe that that's largely a vaccine effect, in that being vaccinated is giving travellers the confidence about the future and the fact that they can travel safely. On the next slide, we asked travellers about what measures they were looking for to give them the confidence to resume travel again. And unsurprisingly, vaccines top the list. They want an effective vaccine. And of course, now, fingers crossed, they've got it. And they've got quite a few vaccines. And they understood the importance of easing lockdowns. And, to be honest, we've seen it all before. Here in the UK, we've had at least 3 national lockdowns. We're used to the impact, and we're used to what happens when things start to ease. So we know how important they are to giving us greater freedom. But they also saw the value of on-trip testing and digital health passes. Their awareness of these tools are growing and certainly has grown between surveys. And then on the next slide, we asked that, we looked into vaccination in a bit more detail, and most travellers told us that they expected to be fully vaccinated by September this year. Now that's great news if airlines mandate vaccinations. I mean, Qantas is a prime example that said it will do that, or countries mandate them, or even if it helps travellers avoid quarantine when they arrive in an overseas destination. More countries, and we're seeing this particularly in Europe, are referencing vaccinated travellers when they're starting to ease restrictions. If you've been vaccinated, there are certain restrictions you should be able to avoid. So vaccinations are key, but looking at what's happening to vaccination programs here in Europe, you can see that even within the same region, countries are vaccinating their population at different speeds. So once again, we expect that the recovery, if it's related to people's vaccination status, is not going to be uniform. And of course, the same is likely to be true between different parts of the US and even Canada as well. So, and what we've realised in the UK is that it's not just about what proportion of the population is vaccinated, it's also about how well the destination's country's population is vaccinated as well, because that increases the risk, if fewer people are vaccinated, of you bringing new variants back home after an overseas trip. Then we talked about some different features on the next slide, and these are, what sort of how do travellers view the different tools that they expect to be part of their programme on the return to travel? And as you can see, vaccines, pre-departure testing, track and trace apps, digital health passes, these are all enablers and they're all seen positively. Quarantine on arrival, that clearly has a disruptive impact on travel, so it's actually seen quite negatively. But for most of these measures, travellers face different rules depending on where they're travelling from and where they're travelling to, and it seems to be changing almost weekly. And the complexity that's created demands a solution that's going to help travellers navigate the rules and also verify that they've met those rules. And digital health passes look to be that solution, and we'll look at those in a bit more detail on the next slides. Now, according to IATA, a digital health pass needs to have 5 elements. It needs to be reliable, so it needs to be able to test, verify that tests are authentic, that's COVID-19 tests, and it also needs to verify traveller identity, so the person that's presenting you that test is actually the person who got tested. They need to be secure, so passengers need to have control over their information, their personal data, and most of these passes will only just confirm that the conditions of entry at the destination have been met rather than displaying any personal information. They also need to be accurate, so they need to be able to tell passengers what the requirements are at their destination, and they also need to be able to confirm for all parties, so that's the airline, immigration, the passenger, that those conditions have been met. In terms of recognition and acceptance, the digital certificates that feature on the apps, they need to be accepted and recognised everywhere the passenger is going to use the pass. And then the information needs to be accessible. So there needs to be two-way sharing of information between all parties. So that's between the passenger, the airline, and the authorities. All of them need to be able to talk to each other. Now, on the next slide, what we asked the travellers themselves, what do they think is needed for a successful digital health pass? And the most important factors were the data. They wanted their personal data to be protected, and they also wanted to ensure that it is correct. The worst thing you need is to turn up at your destination, try to get through border control and find that your data is incorrect. Best case, it will involve some disruption. Worst case, you might be denied entry. They also want them to be simple to use, and they want proof that the actual digital health pass works. And as we'll see, a number of airlines are trialling a number of the leading passes right now, and they need to be widely accepted. And on the next slide, we look at what the travellers actually think of digital health passes. We ask them, who do they trust to deliver the passes? And global NGOs, that's non-governmental organisations, and by that we mean IATA, or the World Economic Forum, or the International Chambers of Commerce, the sort of global bodies. Travellers, more than a third of travellers trusted those sorts of organisations to deliver digital health passes. Surprisingly, a further third trusted governments, and only 10% trusted the airlines. And this is going to create a bit of a conundrum because, IATA is one of these NGOs. It's developing Travel Pass, and it has said that in most cases it expects Travel Pass to be deployed as a white label offering, in that it will be integrated into airline booking processes or airline apps. So if travellers don't trust the airlines to deliver them, they need to understand that actually what the airline is offering has originally been created by the NGO, in this case IATA. In terms of the ones that they've heard of, IATA's done a great job in publicising itself. Half of the travellers have heard of it. Ferryfly, that's the app being used by American Airlines, Alaska Airlines, British Airways, I think Iberia also, and more recently JAL, so that's the One World carriers. And they've done a good job of publicising that. And then you have Common Pass, which is related to the World Economic Forum, and then the ICC AOK Pass, which is the International Chambers of Commerce, and also International SOS is behind that as well. They've still got some ground to make up in terms of raising public awareness. So what's actually going on with terms of digital health passes? On the next slide, you can see all the different players who are involved at the moment. And I won't go into too much detail on this because we have created a paper that you can access, and it's certainly on the bcdtravel.com website. But you have these multiple multinational organisations. Then if we move on and just flick through them, there are airlines that are doing their own thing. Some of these have been creating virtual digital health passes actually on their booking systems. And then if we move on again, and one more. So there's a number of digital health independent organisations who have been adapting existing solutions to provide a digital health pass solution. And then, of course, there are government-backed health passes. Here in the UK, we've got the National Health Service, and they are now rolling out a vaccine certificate type digital health pass app as well. So as you can see, there's lots going on, and from lots of different bodies. And then move on to the next slide, and we can just say a little bit about what Delta Airlines are doing. As I know, Minneapolis is a Delta hub; it's a local airline, and they've done a number of things. Working with Alitalia, they've launched COVID-tested flights to Rome from both Atlanta and New York JFK, and from New York to Milan as well. They've also trialled the ICC AOK Pass on Rome, New York JFK flights, and that's a codeshare flight with Alitalia. And there's another digital health pass called Clear Health Pass, and they've been piloting that on their flights from Los Angeles to Honolulu in Hawaii. And then they're doing some work with SkyTeam, the global alliance that they're a member of, and they're working with TrustAssure, which is a testing organisation, and they're giving passengers access to that through SkyTeam's Sky Care and Protect product. And where it's headed is it's going to be part of the Fly Delta app essentially at some point in the future. And there are some things that I think we need to remember about digital health passes, which we outline on the next slide. Please remember, they are not fully deployed. Airlines are still testing them, a number of airlines around the world, and they are testing different apps. Some airlines are testing two or three different apps to see whether they work for them. Digital health passes are optional. They are not mandatory. No one needs to use them. They're there just so that you don't have to keep digging out hard copies of all your documents to prove that you've complied with the conditions at the destination. If you can build a list of FAQs, that will help your travellers understand and be more comfortable and confident about digital health passes. And if you want to find out more, BCD operates the COVID-19 info hub, and you can find out more details there. And at the bottom of the slide, you'll see I've given the website there. On the next slide, it's what we outline are so many things that just aren't clear yet. It's still early days for digital health passes, and there are still a lot of questions that need to be answered. We don't know how widely they will be accepted. Some governments may not want to use them. We don't know how interoperable they'll be. And by that, I mean, will different digital health passes work with each other? Will they talk to each other? They might even be used on multiple transportation types. For example, Delta has code shares with SNCF, the French high-speed rail operator. Will you be able to use your Delta-backed digital health pass on the SNCF train services as well? We don't know how easy they'll be to use. I've seen some demonstrated. Some of them I think are pretty easy to use. Others I think I'll need to call on my 25-year-old son and he can explain it for me. I think they are certainly variable in their usability. And importantly, we don't know how well they'll work offline. You're not always going to have access to the internet, and we need to be sure that they're still workable when you're in that situation. And I'd just like to move on to resuming travel on the next slide and finish with some more findings from our survey. And we asked travellers to think about the world that they expect to be resuming travel in. What sort of things are they most concerned about? And disruption figured in 3 of their top 4 concerns. And by that, I mean the risk of lockdown, the risk of being quarantined, and the risk of changing travel regulations. Only today, I've just read about Singapore from Friday. So that's what, two days notice is now going to require all overseas travellers, with the exception of people arriving from 3 or 4 countries, to quarantine for 21 days. That's kind of come out of the blue. And that's the sort of thing that travellers are worried about. And if you think, Singapore was a country that had done a great job with containing the virus, and suddenly that's changed almost overnight. The other thing that they're concerned about is bringing home COVID-19 to family members, friends, and of course this is particularly relevant now given the rise of new variants that a lot of people are concerned about. On the next slide, we asked them about COVID-19 measures, and the world that we live in has changed. The world that we travel in has changed. Travel adapted to the pandemic, and in response, it adopted a number of new measures, and some of these will remain beyond the pandemic. We asked travellers about them, and the thing that again seemed to feature high was enhanced cleanliness and health and safety. A lot of travel companies, namely airlines, hotels, public transportation providers, have responded with certainly highlighting the programs that they've put in place and enhancing them, and travellers expect that to stay. And the pandemic may also have acted as a catalyst for touchless, contactless and biometric technologies. And these are things that airlines and hotels have been putting in place over the recent years to try and improve the experience for travellers and save money at the same time. And this drive towards reducing contact with other travellers and certainly reducing contact with staff at the travel suppliers, that's given a catalyst to further adoption of these technologies. And then finally, as we get people travelling again, on the next slide, we've created some infographics about travelling safe. And the rationale behind this was that we've said a lot about COVID-19, and that seems to be all people think about. But as they resume travel, we thought it'd be useful to remind them of some of the day-to-day risks that they face as well, just to reflect upon those, because if they've not travelled for a while, they may have forgotten these. And there's a series, so we have taken a flight. And then on the next slide, we have using ground transportation. Do not worry about reading these, because I understand the guys at Travel One will be sharing copies of these with you after the presentation. And on the next one, we have at the hotel, and then finally at the destination. So that's everything I've got to share with you for now. Thank you for listening to me, and thank you, Bill, for inviting me. And I'll now hand you back over to Bill.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for your insights and all that great information. Just a reminder to everyone that we are monitoring questions in the chat, and we're going to have time at the end for Q&A. So please feel free to write your questions in the chat, and we'll make sure to address those. So now we're going to shift gears, and we're going to focus on a topic that, frankly, I think many of us have taken for granted for a number of years. I know I have, which is when I go to rent a car, there's going to be a car available for me. And when I go to rent a car, that rate is going to be consistent like it has been for these many years. And frankly, right now, both of those ideas are being challenged. So we've invited John Hager to speak with us today. John is the Business Rental Car Manager for Enterprise Holdings. And just as a reminder, Enterprise owns the brands of National and Alamo and Enterprise. And Enterprise is a long-standing and strong partner with Travel One. And John is certainly an expert in the rental car field. So I'm very pleased to introduce John Hager from Enterprise Holdings.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate the introduction. And on behalf of Enterprise Holdings and our team that's here on the phone with everybody today, we appreciate the opportunity to speak today. And more so, I'm going to talk more specific to the industry, not so much specific to just Enterprise. But yeah, as Bill said, I'm the business rental sales manager for the Minnesota and Wisconsin market. I've been with the company 26 years. And if you're not familiar with Enterprise, we're a 60-year privately held company out of St. Louis, Missouri. I'm going to talk specifically towards the the car rental availability issues in the current state of the industry and headwinds pushing pricing up. Steve, do you want to go to the next slide there? So if you're not familiar with us, Jack Taylor, our founder, fought on the USS Enterprise in World War II, and hence the name Enterprise. His granddaughter, Chrissy Taylor, is now the CEO. She took over right before the pandemic, so great timing there. But you can see we have a wide variety of offerings across the globe. But one of the key components of our offerings is just our network that we've created. And Steve, if you want to go to the next slide, this has really been the key to our success here coming through the pandemic. And, when you think about travel resuming, this is a big advantage for us with our off-airport network. Pre-COVID, about 2/3 of our overall business was done on the off-airport, with about 1/3 being on airport. In the industry, with our competitors, 75% or more of the overall business is done at the airports. And to put it in perspective, in the last 12 months, we've done 83% of our overall business off airport. So obviously the slides that Mike showed with the airport business dropping dramatically, it definitely has impacted the car rental industry. Next slide, Steve. So our advice, in the new normal, is really planning ahead when you're doing your trips. I know pre-pandemic, last minute car rental was not an issue. Post-pandemic and current state, you're going to have trouble booking same-day reservations sometimes. And if you're having these difficulties, we definitely would advise on trying to look at other locations. Maybe it's an off-airport location. Maybe it's, that you have to go to the airport, but checking around will definitely help. One area, we don't have cancellation fees at Enterprise Holdings, but they are in the industry. If you can advise your travelers anything on this, is making sure that if you have booked a car and you do cancel your trip, we ask that you do try to cancel the car reservations, because one challenge that the industry faces is no-shows, and booking accordingly to handle that is important. Another, just new thing that we want to point out is, as your travelers are going to the rental counters, encourage them to bring identification or business card to just show that they do work for your company that you're representing. There's been a lot of fraud in the industry over the last few months on people using source numbers and contract ID numbers to get lower rates, and there's liability coverages and stuff like that in there. So Steve, if you want to move to the next. So looking at it more from the industry standpoint, there's been all kinds of stories and articles out. 60 Minutes just did a story on Sunday night on the global computer chip, but this is really causing a more of a perfect storm in the industry, as we had to shrink our fleets significantly at the early stages of the pandemic. We had cars sitting in parking lots from the Mall of America, for instance, to baseball stadium parking lots around the country. And you've seen stories about this, but Hertz had gone into bankruptcy, had to sell off a significant amount of their fleet. Avis had to downsize as well. And we've sold a lot of vehicles. Used car pricing actually went up during the pandemic, and that was an area that, car rental companies were actually able to make some revenue when revenue streams weren't coming in. But now that travel's picked back up, vaccinations are taking place, and people are hitting the road again, we're really running into, especially in our leisure markets in the South, Florida, Arizona, Hawaii, areas that people are getting out and taking these leisure trips to, is that there's outages and shortages of car rentals where you're running into sellouts. And a big part of this, obviously, is we're trying to refleet through the manufacturers, through ordering, and the manufacturers have scaled back production and had shut down a lot of facilities of their own, scaling back due to COVID. But a new problem has arisen with this computer chip shortage that is, every car today has different types of computer chips in them. And this is really causing a logjam, and it's causing companies to hang on to their fleets and look for other ways to fill. We're going to continue to work closely with the manufacturers to try to, move more vehicles, be creative with our buys to get vehicles in, but that is a challenge. Next slide, Steve. So when you look at just overall in the industry, car rental pricing is going to be going up, driven a lot by supply and demand as people hit the road again. You are going to see vehicles that you haven't seen in the past from a mileage standpoint, vehicles that might be a little bit older because we aren't actively out selling to car auctions and dealership groups. I know there's an article yesterday in Bloomberg how Hertz and Enterprise are going to the auctions around the country and buying used cars, lease returns, and low mileage vehicles to supplement, increasing fleets right now, while that we're waiting for more new vehicles to come in. But you'll probably see cars in the 50 to 60, maybe even hitting 70,000 miles by the end of the summer as this issue continues. Overall, increased costs, even prior to the pandemic, we're pointing on rates increasing in the industry, and I'll talk about that in the next few slides. So ground transportation in general, not just car rental companies, but taxis, limos, car share, commercial fleets in general are all facing some strong headwinds and have been even pre-pandemic for the last 5 years. And I'll break these down kind of one by one. Steve, if you want to go to the next slide. One more. There we go. The manufacturers, due to consumer preference, have switched a lot of the vehicles that are entering the market. If you think about what the average person's buying out there today, a lot of it is SUVs, crossovers, pickup trucks, stuff like that is where they're making their money. And they're like Ford, for instance, has cut out a good majority of the small fleets, like the Focuses, the Tauruses, the Fusions, where those were good predominant car rental fleet vehicles. And a lot of the manufacturers are moving to this different fleet mix, which has increased costs on ground transportation as those costs are higher. And then obviously we talked about the semiconductor issues, but that's another thing that is going to continue this year to help with raising costs overall. Next slide, Steve. One more. There we go. When you look at just overall increase of vehicles, in the last 2 years, we've seen about a 6% increase. But you go back as far as 2014, and it's been a significant uphill climb. And when you think about where car rental pricing rates have been for the last 10 years, it's been a flat to lower pricing in the overall industry. Next slide. And then, you know, one of the key components that's driving this too is the advanced driver assistance systems that are in all the new cars today. Currently, 80% of the 2020s that we had in our fleet have this type of technology. You think about the lane departure warning, you think about the different cameras, the sensors that are in the bumpers. All these add up and are bringing costs up, and the cost to repair these type of vehicles is significantly more. There's a lot of calibration, stuff like that that goes into it. Next slide, Steve. You look at the most basic car, a Hyundai Elantra, one of our lowest priced vehicles in the fleet, and just a basic front bumper cover is up 130% in costs from parts and labor, and then, you know, headlights, stuff like that. So you take small cars like that, you look at bigger vehicles, they're going to be even higher costs to repair. So these are just some of the headwinds. Steve, if you want to just go to the last slide here, you know, that we're facing in the industry and as we look to exit this pandemic. But I really, truly appreciate, Bill, you letting us come in and talk today. And thank you for the opportunity, and everybody have a great Cinco de Mayo.
Thank you, John. Great. And thanks for sharing all of that. So, you know, I just want to reiterate what John said, which is these issues that John talked about are really rental car industry issues, not specific to enterprise. You're not going to get a different answer or a better answer from a different rental car vendor. In fact, you know, based on what John just laid out, you may get a better answer from enterprise. But I mean, it caught my ear when John talked about headwinds facing the rental car industry, which I kind of smiled and I said, well, that's a kind way of saying the cost of rental cars are going to go up, right? So I thought it would be appropriate if I looked into my crystal ball and tried to predict what the cost of travel is going to be over the next 6 to 12 to 18 months, and really make the case why we see domestic airfares recovering pretty quickly to pre-COVID, pre-pandemic levels. But, you know, perhaps there's a little better news on the hotel side. So first, a disclaimer about my crystal ball. First of all, it might not be any better than your crystal ball. And I've been told at times my crystal ball doesn't work. And what else? That I'm sure there will be markets that that these trends don't apply to, because there always are. But here are some overarching trends that we're seeing, and you know, and here are the data points. So I read the notes from the American Airlines first quarter 2021 earnings call, and really what caught my eye from that earnings call was that their first quarter 2021 airfares, according to American, were ranging from 30% to 50% below 2019 levels. And I thought to myself, wow, I mean, that's a pretty significant decrease. And I know I've said internally at Travel One that, the last 12 months has been a pretty good time to travel. And I've said that mostly internally because I know that could be a pretty insensitive thing to say given COVID. But from a strictly economic standpoint, the last 12 months have been a pretty good time to travel. So if you fast forward to today, now May of 21, and you're looking to make a reservation, let's just say for summer of 2021, to let's just say a leisure market, and think Florida or some Mexico destinations or Vegas or some of these traditional leisure destinations, we're seeing airfares that are really only 10% or so lower than they were in 2019. So a pretty quick, pretty fast snapback of domestic airfares to leisure destinations. Now, having said that, fares to more corporate destinations are still depressed, but don't get me wrong, we're seeing those increase too. So let's go into a few of the reasons why we're seeing this. So if you go to the next slide, Steve, thank you. So from a net income perspective, and so just as a reminder to everybody, net income is your revenue after you subtract out expenses and taxes and costs. So I mean, it's your net income after expenses. And you can see here, wow, 157 billion with a B of losses that have been recorded in the last couple, that estimated to be recorded in 2020 and the finish of 2021. So that's going to wipe out 3 to 5 years worth of profits. So that's just a different way of saying that the airlines are going to want to generate cash as soon as they possibly can, right? And on the next slide, we'll see that the price of oil is following inversely with COVID cases. So as the number of COVID cases go down, the price of oil is going up. And just as a reminder, from an airline perspective, labor is their number one cost, and then oil follows at number two, ranging at about 20 to 30% of airline costs. So as COVID cases go down, as employee traveler confidence goes up, and the price of oil goes up, you're going to see airfares starting to go up. And then the last thing that we wanted to point out about the airlines is that the airlines have been pretty successful in pulling seats out of the air. And they pulled seats out of the air to match the lower demand that's been in the marketplace, right? And they've converted some to cargo, and they've parked some in the desert and all these things that you read about, right? But now the airlines are going to be pretty slow to return inventory back into the system so that they can manage their revenue. And as demand increases, of course, they're going to want to get their airplanes, which they're paying on, right? They want to get them parked, but they're going to want to increase their fares as well. So that's my little final analysis on airfares and why we see, or why I predict, domestic airfares. When I talk about airfares, I'm talking domestic. A little too early to be talking about international airfares at this point, but we're seeing domestic airfares recovering relatively quickly to pre-pandemic levels. All right, perhaps there's a little better news on the hotel side of things. I'll go through this quickly so there's time for Q&A, but I think history has proven that airfares recover quicker than hotel daily rates. After 9/11, we saw that it took longer for hotel rates to recover compared to airfares. After the 2008 and 2009 recession, we saw airfares snap back faster than hotels. So I don't see any reason why it would be different here after COVID. You can see, compared to 2019, average daily rates down 21% in 20, only recovering 4%, and only projected to recover another 8%. So we're seeing the trend play out, that airfares will recover faster than hotel rates. Just a couple of other real quick interesting items about hotels. We're seeing hotel rates in large cities, so the kind of inner city hotels recover at a slower rate than your more suburban or rural hotels. And we're certainly seeing hotel rates in the corporate destinations recovering at a slower rate than the leisure destinations. So Yeah, you can see here, if 2019 is the baseline, we're through 2020, we're into 2021. They're not predicting hotel rates really make it back until 2023. So maybe some good news there on the cost of travel with regard to hotels. So, okay, I want to pause there and make sure we have a few minutes for question and answer. So Cindy, I would invite you to come back in and moderate some Q&A.
Thank you, Bill. We have just one question I'd like to present. This one is for Mike, but I wanted to let everybody know that if questions come up later, please reach out to your account manager here at Travel One, and we can address them individually. And secondly, a recording of this presentation will be provided to everyone on the call. If that generates questions, again, please contact us. So the question for Mike pertains to his state of restrictions he mentioned earlier. What is the predicted timing for reopening international travel from the US into Europe?
Okay, that's a good one. Well, I think before that can happen, you're going to need a reciprocal agreement on both sides. So Europe needs to allow US travellers in, and vice versa. US needs to allow European travellers in. And of course, Europe is more than just the European Union now. You've got the UK outside of the EU, so that's a separate European market. And I think US-UK will precede US-EU. We're due to resume non-essential international travel, I believe from the 17th of May. And we're using a traffic light system, so red, amber, green. And my understanding is there's a very good chance that the US will be on the green list, which will allow international travel from the UK to resume to the US. And that list could be confirmed as early as Friday. We have elections here tomorrow, so the government is delaying it until after the election results. And looking at the EU side, the EU has started to talk about allowing travel from third countries, including the US, and they're actually talking about it today with member states. But then once they've agreed, then it's going to be up to individual member states to decide when they're going to allow travellers to arrive and from which countries. So, for example, Spain has recently announced that it's extending its travel ban on arrivals from both the UK and the US until the end of May. So the earliest you can expect to travel to Spain from the US would be June. Then, of course, you have the complication of the Schengen area, because once you land in Spain, you can basically go to most of Europe without having to show your passport. So while Spain might not allow you to travel from the US, France might. And so I think it's going to be rather confusing. But I think the EU would prefer all EU member states to synchronise their reopening. June seems to be the most likely, but it could be as late as July. There are a number of European countries, Netherlands and France, for example, still are battling with high numbers of COVID-19. And that makes me wonder if the US would even allow travellers from those countries to go back across the Atlantic. So UK first, Europe second. Timing, possibly May, early June for the UK, a bit later for Europe.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate the explanation. That's it for questions for this hour. I'll turn it over to you, Bill.
Yeah, great. So we're at the top of the hour. I'm going to wrap up. Mike, one of the things that you just said that caught my ear is it's confusing. And yes, it is. The recovery of travel, whether it's domestic travel, international travel, rental car, there's a lot to know. And I hope you'll lean on us, Travel One, as your travel management partner to help sort through all of that. Frankly, that's what we're here for. So I'll wrap up by saying thank you for attending our session. To all of the attendees, a big thank you to Mike from BCD and John from Enterprise for sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge with us. In the next few days, you'll get a survey from us. We like to send out surveys to make sure we're delivering content that meets your needs. So please help us with that. And frankly, we look forward to our next forum, which will be in the fall, which we hope will be in person, and at the very least will very likely be some form of an in-person or hybrid event. But with that, I just want to say thank you. Thank you again. Thank you for your partnership with Travel One, and I wish you a great rest of your day.